Anthony Ayres, 49, was sentenced to a whole life prison term for the murder of his lover Kelly Pierce, 36, at a flat in Canvey Island, Essex. Ayres attacked Pierce with a claw hammer before stabbing her more than 40 times, causing fatal injuries. Pierce bled to death in front of police and paramedics after Ayres fled the scene. He was later arrested after being caught on CCTV and linked to the crime via DNA evidence. This is Ayres' second murder conviction. In 1994, he was jailed for life at the Old Bailey for strangling his former partner Dawn Wisdom after she had aborted their unborn child. He was released on license in March 2012. The court heard that Ayres had a long history of violence against women, including attacks in 1988 and 1989, which raised concerns about his early release. During sentencing, Judge Maura McGowan described the attack on Pierce as extraordinary brutality amounting to sadism, noting that Ayres had now been convicted of murdering a woman for the second time. The victim's family described Kelly as a loving mother and daughter with a big heart, while Essex police stated that Ayres was a dangerous individual responsible for horrific injuries. Andrew Dawson, born in 1962, is a British serial killer responsible for 3 murders spanning nearly 3 decades. He is serving a whole life order for his latter 2 murders, meaning he will never be released from prison. Dawson's first known murder occurred in August 1981 in Ormskirk. His victim, 91-year-old shopkeeper Henry Walsh, was stabbed 11 times. Dawson was convicted of Walsh's murder in 1982 and subsequently imprisoned. He was released on license in 1999, but was returned to prison on 3 separate occasions between 2003 and 2007, before being released again in 2008. Nearly 3 decades later, Dawson committed 2 further murders in Chaddesden, Derby. On the 25th of July 2010, John David Matthews was found stabbed to death in his flat. 5 days later, Paul Hancock was similarly murdered in the same area. In both cases, Dawson placed the victims' bodies in bathtubs, apparently to remove odors, highlighting a methodical approach to concealment. Dawson was arrested on the same day Matthews' body was discovered, in Whitehaven. On the 18th of July 2011, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order for these 2 murders, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Andrew Dawson's crimes have been featured in multiple documentaries, illustrating the gravity and notoriety of his actions. These include a 2012 episode of When Life Means Life and a 2020 episode of Britain's Most Evil Killers. Dawson's criminal trajectory, from his first murder in 1981 to his final killings in 2010, demonstrates a persistent and lethal pattern of violence, culminating in a sentence that guarantees he will never re-enter society. 17-year-old Mark Robinson had recently joined the RAF when on the 27th of May 1979, he was home on leave for the bank holiday. During this time, he murdered his 32-year-old neighbour, Patricia Wagner. Robinson strangled her at her home in Low Grange, Billingham, leaving her body on the living room floor. Wagner's 8-year-old son discovered her body shortly afterward. Witnesses reported seeing Robinson walking toward her house in the rain less than 2 hours after she was last seen alive, and he was arrested within hours. Robinson later admitted to police that he had gone to Wagner's house seeking sex, believing she would not refuse him. He gained entry by claiming he was drunk and had confused the address. According to Robinson, Wagner threatened to tell his mother about the encounter. Robinson claimed he lost his temper after she insulted him, hitting her in the face. Wagner attempted to defend herself, but Robinson punched and kicked her, then used a lamp cord to strangle her. The post-mortem confirmed that Wagner died from asphyxiation and also suffered facial injuries, including a broken nose. Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder. After serving 10 years, Robinson was released in March 1989. He later met Sharon Morley in Wakefield, and they moved to Billingham, though their relationship was marked by frequent arguments, largely because Morley wanted to return to Wakefield. On the 19th of September 1989, just 7 months after his release, Robinson discovered a photograph of her former boyfriend. During a heated argument, he attacked Morley, beating and stabbing her to death. At Newcastle Crown Court, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a whole-life tariff. In 2011, weighing 20 stone and standing 6 feet tall, Robinson assaulted several prison officers after his bread ration was altered. The attack required 10 staff to subdue him, resulted in 5 officers being hospitalized, and earned him an additional 3 years on his sentence. Harbi Ali, an ISIS-inspired extremist, was sentenced to a whole-life term for the murder of Sir David Ayres, the Conservative MP for Southend West. On the 15th of October, Ali gained entry to Sir David's constituency surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea by pretending to be an NHS worker. Once inside, Ali stabbed the MP more than 20 times. Sir David had devoted 38 years to public service and was engaged in helping constituents when he was attacked. The murder shocked the nation and was described by Judge Mr. Justice Sweeney as a crime that struck at the heart of our democracy. Ali, from Kentish Town in North London, told the court that he had considered targeting other MPs, including Michael Gove, as part of a plan motivated by revenge for MP's votes on airstrikes in Syria. During the trial, Ali showed no remorse, stating that he had no regrets or shame for his actions and had intended to die as a martyr, anticipating that police would shoot him. He instructed his barrister not to present anything in mitigation, and he displayed little emotion as the judge delivered the sentence, which ensures he will never be released from prison. The court heard impact statements from members of Parliament and staff affected by the attack. Some MPs described heightened personal security measures, including wearing stab vests and installing panic alarms during constituency surgeries. Julie Cushion, a long-time aide present during the attack, recounted the traumatic experience of trying to help while witnessing Ali's smug, self-satisfied demeanor. She described being haunted by the fear of a similar attack. The jury convicted Ali of both murder and preparing acts of terrorism after just 18 minutes of deliberation. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crime, noting that Sir David had done nothing to justify the attack and describing his death as a loss of national significance. The whole-life sentence ensures that Ali will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Ryan Matthews was being sentenced to a whole-life term for the murder of healthcare worker Sharon Wall at Wotton Lawn Hospital in Gloucester. Matthews was already serving a life sentence for a previous double murder. On 9th July, Ms. Wall, 53, was stabbed twice in the back at the hospital's Montpellier low-secure unit where Matthews was living. Despite efforts from staff, she could not be saved. Matthews pleaded guilty to her murder in December. Investigations by both police and the NHS have not determined how Matthews obtained the knife, though officials confirmed it was not one of the controlled sharps kept on the ward. Matthews, who has previously changed his name, was convicted in 1983 under the name Stephen Cecil King for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to murder. His mental health had been monitored over multiple hospital placements since leaving Broadmoor High Security Hospital in 1999 under the Mental Health Act. At the time of the killing, Matthews suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder, which had been managed with medication. He had arrived at Wotton Lawn in 2012 and was due to be transferred to Ty Catrin Hospital in Cardiff on the day of the attack. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Porter described the case as dreadful, highlighting that Ms. Wall was a dedicated and hard-working healthcare worker assistant whose family has been left devastated. Sean Clee, Chief Executive of the Gloucestershire Together NHS Foundation Trust, confirmed that Matthews' prior convictions were known to staff and that they had been satisfied with his placement at the time. The Trust is reviewing and strengthening search procedures at the unit. Michael Smith, born around 1954, is a British convicted murderer who received a whole-life sentence after killing Peter Summers in 2006, less than a year after being released from a 30-year prison term for a previous murder. Smith had originally been jailed for the 1975 murder of his then-girlfriend, 18-year-old Sheila Deakin, whom he strangled following an argument over another man. He served 30 years before being released on 26 August 2005. On or around 17 August 2006, Smith attacked 35-year-old Peter Summers in his flat in Stoke-on-Trent using a champagne bottle. Summers sustained massive head injuries and was left to die, possibly surviving for several days before succumbing to his injuries. Smith's motive was theft. He intended to steal £8,000 that Summers had stored at home, and he used some of the stolen money on a shopping spree with his girlfriend, Caroline Hume, in Stafford. Smith gave himself up to police on the 25th of August 2006, not to confess but because he was being recalled to prison. He admitted to the murder, and at Stafford Crown Court, Mr. Justice Nelson described the attack as brutal, noting the shocking fact that it was Smith's second murder. He was sentenced to a whole-life tariff, meaning he will never be released from prison, and is listed by the Home Office as one of the prisoners who will die in custody. Smith's case highlights the dangers posed by violent offenders re-entering society and raises serious questions about parole and the monitoring of released murderers. Direece Roche was sentenced to a whole-life prison term for the murder of his great-uncle, 64-year-old Fintan McDwyer, in Fallowfield, South Manchester, on the 30th of June 2024. Roche attacked McDwyer after climbing through his bedroom window in what he later claimed was a bungled attempt to steal the victim's dog, a Staffordshire Bull Terrier cross. McDwyer, who was home alone at the time, was stabbed 77 times. His body was discovered the following day by his son. Roche had been released on license only months earlier, having served 12 years for the murder of Adam Steele in 2011, when Roche was 16. Steele had been stabbed by Roche during a dispute at a New Year's Eve party in Salford. Roche received a life sentence with a minimum term of 12 years, while his older brother Owen was convicted of manslaughter. During the investigation into McDwyer's death, Greater Manchester Police recovered audio of the struggle captured on a CCTV camera McDwyer had installed to monitor his dog. Additional CCTV outside the property showed a masked man climbing fences to flee, and forensic evidence, including blood traces and DNA from a small torch, linked Roche to the crime. When arrested, Roche admitted killing McDwyer, but claimed he acted in self-defense and had only intended to steal the dog. At Manchester Crown Court, Roche was convicted of murder in May 2025 and received a whole life sentence, meaning he will never be released. Detective Inspector Lee Shaw described the attack as nothing short of horrific, praising the family's resilience during the trial. McDwyer's family paid tribute to him as a true gentleman and lamented that he was denied years with his sons and grandchildren. Roche's sentencing marks the second life sentence for a murder committed shortly after release, highlighting the tragic consequences of his repeated violent behavior. Stephen Wright is an English serial killer known as the Suffolk Strangler. He is serving life imprisonment for the murder of 5 women in Ipswich, Suffolk, during the final months of 2006, for which he was given a whole life order. Wright was the second of 4 children born to military policeman Conrad Wright and veterinary nurse Patricia. His early life involved frequent relocations due to his father's military service, including periods in Malta and Singapore. His mother left the family when he was 6, and his parents divorced in 1978. Wright left school at 16 without qualifications and subsequently joined the Merchant Navy, working as a chef on ferries from Felixstowe, Suffolk. Wright married twice, first to Angela O'Donovan, with whom he had a son, Michael, and later to Diane Cassell, though both marriages ended in divorce. Over the years, Wright held various jobs, including steward on the ocean liner Queen Elizabeth II, lorry driver, barman, pub landlord, and forklift truck driver. He accrued large gambling debts and declared bankruptcy in the late 1990s. Wright also attempted to take his own life twice, once in 1994 and again in 2000. Prior to the murders, his only criminal conviction was for theft in 2001. He had a history of soliciting prostitutes, which became a significant factor in his later crimes. Between October and December 2006, Wright murdered 5 women in Ipswich, most of whom were sex workers. Forensic evidence, including traces of blood in his car, led to his arrest on the 19th of December 2006. He was convicted of all 5 murders on the 21st of February 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. Wright initially appealed his convictions, but later withdrew his appeal. He has since been charged with the 1999 murder of 17-year-old Victoria Hall and the attempted kidnapping of another woman, with his trial set for February 2026. Victor Miller, born in 1956, is a British criminal serving a life sentence for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of 14-year-old Stuart Gough in Hagley, Worcestershire, in 1988. A computer operator by profession, Miller targeted newspaper boys, considering them vulnerable. Police suspect he may have been responsible for up to 28 other sexual assaults. In February 1988, Miller abducted Stuart Gough while the boy was on his paper round. Stuart, who suffered from asthma, was sexually assaulted before Miller beat him repeatedly with a rock and concealed his body in a remote woodland area. Despite extensive search efforts involving over 170 officers, police helicopters, search dogs, mounted units, and underwater search teams, Stuart's body remained undiscovered for 2 weeks. Miller was arrested for an unrelated assault during this period. Following his arrest, he confessed to Stuart's murder and guided investigators to the boy's body, which had been hidden under a pile of leaves. During preliminary proceedings, Miller expressed remorse in a letter to Hereford Magistrates' Court, asking for justice to be served and for the maximum sentence to be imposed. At trial, he remained largely silent as charges were read. Miller was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation to serve 30 years. Following this, the Home Secretary issued him a whole life tariff, placing him among a select group of criminals designated to spend the remainder of their lives in prison. After the European Court of Human Rights ruled against politically set tariffs, Miller's sentence was recalculated at 30 years. Under current provisions, his case is reviewed after 25 years and every 5 years thereafter, with the earliest possible release initially set for 2013. However, Miller himself has requested that he never be considered for release, and his trial judge expressed uncertainty about whether it would ever be safe to allow him out. Stephen Sansom was sentenced to a whole life order for the murder of Sarah Mayhew, whose dismembered body he and his partner, Gemma Watts, disposed of across multiple locations in London. Sansom, who was out on life license following a 1998 murder of a taxi driver, and Watts both admitted to murder and perverting the course of justice. Watts was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Mrs. Justice Cutts described Miss Mayhew's greatest misfortune was to know the two of you, and emphasized that Sansom had shown no remorse for his actions. The court heard that Ms. Mayhew, who had 2 children aged 12 and 15, met Sansom through a dating website. Messages exchanged between Sansom and Watts revealed plans for depraved and violent sexual activity that escalated into murder. On 8 March 2024, Ms. Mayhew was lured to Sansom's flat in Sutton, where she was subjected to sadomasochistic violence and killed. Her head and limbs were later discovered in Rowdown Field in New Addington, nearly 8 miles from the flat, and her torso was found in the River Wandle. Prosecutor Tom Little KC described the killing as involving sexual and sadistic conduct. Evidence indicated that Sansom and Watts's relationship, which had begun 7 months earlier, was marked by intense sadomasochistic violence, and they had discussed dying together if caught. Sansom reportedly claimed, "We're not evil. We're not evil." "We done the world a service," Ms. Mayhew's parents, David and Angela, read statements describing the profound impact of her death, recalling her as a beautiful, pretty girl with a wide circle of friends. The court heard that Watts had been obsessed with Sansom, though the judge clarified that she was not merely acting under his influence. Both defendants received concurrent sentences of 5 years for perverting the course of justice. Sansom's prior conviction and release on license, along with the brutal nature of this murder, contributed to the imposition of a whole life order. Wayne Couzens, a former Metropolitan Police officer, was sentenced to a whole life term for the kidnap, gape and murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everard in March 2021. On 3rd March, Couzens stopped Everard while she walked home in South London, falsely identifying himself as a police officer and handcuffing her. He drove her to Kent, where he gaped and strangled her, later attempting to destroy evidence by burning her body in a refrigerator and disposing of her remains in a pond. Everard's death sparked nationwide shock and widespread debate about women's safety and police accountability. Couzens, born in Dover in 1972, had a history of troubling behavior, including prior allegations of indecent exposure that were inadequately investigated. Despite this, he served in Kent Police, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and ultimately the Metropolitan Police, joining the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch in 2020, without undergoing proper vetting or completing the mandatory probation period. His exploitation of police authority to commit his crimes was a key factor in the severity of his sentencing. He was arrested on the 9th of March 2021 and charged with kidnapping and murder. Couzens pleaded guilty to the kidnap and gape on 8th June and to murder on 9th July 2021. On 30th September, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he will never be released. Couzens is currently held at HM Prison Frankland. The case prompted a public inquiry, chaired by Lady Elish Angelini KC, which found systemic failures in vetting and monitoring, noting that Couzens had a history of sexual offending and should never have been allowed to serve as a police officer. The inquiry made 16 recommendations aimed at preventing abuse of police power in the future. David Mitchell admitted to murdering Robert Hind, a fellow sex offender in West Yorkshire, less than 18 months after his release from a life sentence. Hind, who had previously been identified by police as a risk to the public, went missing from Dewsbury in December 2013 while on license. CCTV footage last captured him at Huddersfield bus station in the company of Mitchell. Hind's body was later discovered in the River Colne in Milnesbridge, Huddersfield. A post-mortem revealed he died from head injuries and strangulation. Mitchell was originally jailed for life in 1991 for murdering his estranged partner. In July 2012, he briefly absconded from HMP Kirkham in Lancashire, but was recaptured 3 days later. Following Mitchell's guilty plea, the probation service emphasized that while they strive to manage the risk posed by released offenders, it is impossible to eliminate it entirely. They also noted that a thorough review had been carried out to learn lessons from the case. Alan Maidment, a convicted killer from Salford, was handed a whole life sentence after brutally murdering Thomas Jones in what police described as a monstrous attack. Just 9 months after being released on license for a previous killing, Maidment armed himself with a knife and launched a frenzied assault on Jones, stabbing him 32 times at his flat in Swinton. The attack was sparked after Maidment's ex-girlfriend told him that Jones had assaulted her. In a chilling effort to conceal the crime, he dragged Jones's body into the living room, piled objects on top of it, and set the scene alight before watching from a bench as fire crews tackled the blaze. Less than 2 weeks later, Maidment's violence spiraled further when he carried out a string of knife-point robberies under the influence of cocaine, ecstasy, and cannabis. He terrorized victims within minutes of one another before turning up at a McDonald's in Chadderton and telling staff to call police because he had killed someone. Greater Manchester Police condemned his actions as reckless and life-threatening, with Detective Duncan Thorpe branding him a particularly dangerous individual. Having already served time for a previous killing before his 2016 release, Maidment's return to murder so soon after freedom left the court with little choice but to impose the rare whole-life order, ensuring he will never be released. Alongside the murder conviction, he also received concurrent sentences for robbery and possession of a bladed weapon. Andrew Randall was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole-life order for the murder of his 7-week-old daughter, Jessica Randall, on the 21st of November 2005. He had also committed grievous bodily harm and multiple counts of sexual abuse against the infant. Jessica Randall was born 5 weeks prematurely and lived with her father Andrew and mother Sharon Park, who suffered from schizophrenia. Randall had a history of violent fantasies and a fascination with serial killers and horror films. He admitted that he had fantasized about harming Jessica almost daily from her birth. On the morning of the 21st of November 2005, Randall allegedly attempted to quiet his daughter by throwing her head first into the wooden arms of a settee. Forensic examinations revealed multiple injuries, including 9 broken ribs, a fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, and cuts to her face. Post-mortem reports concluded the abuse had continued almost continuously during Jessica's short life. Randall admitted murder, grievous bodily harm, and 4 counts of sexual abuse at Northampton Crown Court on the 15th of November 2006. On the 13th of March 2007, Judge Charles Wyde QC sentenced him to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. The judge described Randall as a sadistic killer whose crimes included a sexual element bound up with extreme violence. Randall had previously written poems about wanting to kill. Mcloughlin's criminal history spans decades and multiple murders. His first killing occurred in 1984, when he attacked 49-year-old Len Delgatti with a hammer and then strangled him. The jury convicted Mcloughlin of manslaughter rather than murder on the 19th of September 1984, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a term later reduced to 8 years on appeal in June 1985. Just over a year after his release, in September 1990, Mcloughlin committed his second murder, killing Peter Halls in Brighton. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in July 1992 at Lewes Crown Court, with the Lord Chief Justice recommending a minimum term of 14 years. On 13th July 2013, 21 years later, Mcloughlin was released on temporary license. On that same day, he murdered Graham Buck, a man who had intervened while investigating his neighbor's cries for help. Mcloughlin was convicted of both murder and robbery, and initially sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years, along with 8 years concurrent for the robbery. Due to a recent European Court of Human Rights ruling, the trial judge was unable to impose a whole life term at that time, meaning Mcloughlin would not be eligible for parole until at least the age of 95. Following a February 2014 ruling by British judges confirming the legality of whole life tariffs, Mcloughlin's 40-year minimum term was overturned, and he was handed a whole life order, ensuring that he will spend the remainder of his life in prison. John Childs, also known as Bruce Childs, is a British contract killer from East London who was convicted in 1979 for a series of murders carried out between 1974 and 1978. Despite his convictions, none of the victims' bodies were ever recovered, and no murder weapons were found. Childs implicated 2 associates, Terry Pinfold and Harry McKenny, in the killings, but both were later released in 2003 after the court concluded that Childs' testimony was unreliable, describing him as a pathological liar. Today, Childs is serving a whole life tariff, making it unlikely he will ever be released. Childs was arrested in September 1978 for a series of bank and security van robberies in Hertfordshire. In June 1979, he confessed to Detective Chief Superintendent Frank Cater that he had carried out 6 contract killings. The victims included Terence Terry Eve, Robert Brown, George Brett and his 10-year-old son Terry, Frederick Freddie Sherwood and Ronald Andrews. At the Old Bailey, Childs was convicted on the 4th of December 1979 and sentenced to 6 concurrent life terms. During the trial, he turned Queen's evidence, claiming that Pinfold and McKenny had ordered the killings. He alleged that Eve was murdered to take over his business, that Brett and his son were lured under the pretense of work before being shot, and that Andrews and Sherwood were killed over personal disputes and debts. Childs also admitted he had considered killing McKenny with a crossbow out of fear. The co-accused, Pinfold, McKenny, Leonard Thompson and Paul Morton Thurtle, were tried in October 1980. Childs' testimony played a central role, though the defense presented witnesses claiming he had lied to protect his wife Tina from being accused of murder. The jury convicted Pinfold and McKenny, while Thompson and Morton Thurtle were acquitted. McKenny received a life sentence and had to be restrained in court. Childs was later issued a whole life tariff by at least one Home Secretary. While in prison, Childs made further admissions about his crimes. In 1986, he stated that Pinfold had only been convicted due to his own perjured evidence. Later, through letters and interviews with newspapers, he claimed to have dismembered and burned the bodies of his victims in a council flat in Poplar. In 1998, he reportedly confessed to committing 5 additional murders. Pinfold and McKenney repeatedly appealed their convictions. Initially unsuccessful, their convictions were overturned in December 2003 after the Court of Appeal ruled that Child's evidence was unreliable. Psychiatric evaluation had found that Childs had a personality disorder that made him compulsively dishonest, information the original jury had not received. Child's stories about the murders also shifted over time. Reports suggested that Eve might have been alive at one point, and that Childs had used multiple aliases, including the name Martin Jones. McKenney's former wife also claimed that much of Childs' account was fabricated. Childs had joined the British Army as a sapper, but was expelled after 9 months for burglary. Before his murders, he had a criminal record for theft, including motorbikes, and worked for Pinfold and McKenney. He was married and had 2 daughters, but his wife Tina divorced him following his conviction in 1982.